This video is a part of a free chapter from my new course, The Blendinator. Click the links in the description to learn more. Last time we talked about taking the UV project modifier from the camera that's projecting onto our object here. If we tab into edit mode, select everything, you can see this is our duplicated UV from the original. But if we take our UV map called mod, using that in our UV project modifier, and if we apply it, of course we have to be in object mode to apply, we can apply that, and then you can see we have our UVs set up the same way our geometry is when looking from our camera. And so this did make the texture sticky without having to move the camera. And when I do move the camera, nothing happens. So that is a good first start, but we are experiencing this warping again when we do it like that. And last time we talked about the reason for that is the order of operations. When you have a UV project modifier after the subdivision surface, then everything looks straight. But if you put it before it in the stack, then we have the warping. But regardless of where it is in the stack, if you apply this first, then this would be the first order of operations, and then the subdivision, which is what causes that warping. So we don't want to apply any of these just yet. Instead, we're going to make it sticky using a couple of different methods. And the first one is going to be our painting method. So we've done texture painting before in earlier chapters. We're going to use that to paint onto this. But first, we have to figure out how to unwrap our UV map. So if I add a new cube and just scroll out and then tab into edit mode, you can see here's the cube default UV map. And to show you kind of what's happening here and why it looks like this, I've made a quick demonstration here. Here is the cube. And I've numbered all of the sides of the cube from 1 to 6. But you can see these red lines on these edges here, and that indicates that these are seams. And the seams just mean that's where the edges are here in our 2D view that are going to be cut and split apart while it's laid out here. So we can see that I made this little animation here in the geometry where we can see this being unwrapped like this. You can see it's starting to unwrap. And then if I keep going, it flattens out just like this. And the reason the 4 is upside down like this is just because of that. So you can see when I wrap this up, you can see that 4 being flipped up back to the right side up like that. And so that's what's happening over here, but only in 2 dimensions and only for the texture. When you unwrap things in Blender, the geometry doesn't split open like this. I just created this animation so you can kind of visualize what's happening here. But you wouldn't actually create these splits here in the geometry itself. This is just to show you what the 2-dimensional texture and the UVs are doing. So what we want to do is we want to emulate this with our Exploding Kittens box. So if we take this and we scale this out like this, and then maybe scale it in like this, that's generally the shape of our, maybe not quite as long, something like that. But the same concept still applies where you can see the seams and it unwraps at the seams like that. So let's take note of where all of these seams are. So you can see on the sides, we have the top and the bottom on each of the sides. And then on the back, we have the left side, the right side, and the top. And that's it. So let's do that with our box. So coming back here, we can delete this cube, and then going into edit mode, we can go into edge select. We want to select the tops and the bottoms. I'm just shift selecting. The tops and the bottoms of the sides, and then the left and the right and the back and the top. Then make sure we're still in edge select mode and right click and then select mark seam. Now again, we're not splitting our geometry. We're just telling the UVs how to split up here in the 2D view. But we don't want to change this one here. We want to duplicate, let's duplicate the original so you can kind of see it change. So we'll call this flat because this is going to be all of the sides of our box flattened out. And if we select everything, You can see this is the original, but with this flat selected, remember, if we select the different ones, now they're all the same here. With our modifier, what I can do is come in here just for demonstration's sake, project from view like we did last time, just so we can see this is what it looks like. But remember, when we're using the UV project modifier, it doesn't matter where these are. It's not going to change the textures at all. But this is just for visual representation. So when we click here back and forth between all of these, you can see it changes over here. So let's select our flat UV map, and then I can do this anywhere. So I'm just going to come out to the front here like this. And it doesn't matter where we are because it's going to be calculating our seams. So now we can, in edit mode, select everything, press U, and then just choose unwrap from the top. And now you can see here are the UVs following the same sort of pattern that we had on our cube based on the seams that we just created. So now if I select these back and forth, you can see we're cycling through the original, the projection modifier, and then the flat. Now there's a difference between selecting the UV maps themselves to display over here in the UV editor, or selecting the active render here, which displays the UVs that we're using in the viewport. So now you can see the flat is being used in the viewport as the active render. And if I select everything over here with A, I can move that around, and now you can see sort of what is happening. So wherever I move this, you can see it being reflected on there. Of course, we don't want to use the UVs here on this image to paint on here. We want to create a new image to paint onto. So let's come up over here, click this button to create a new image. I'm going to title this Paint because that's what we're going to start with. 1024 by 1024 is fine. I'm going to uncheck alpha. The color is fine. I'm going to say OK. And there we go. So now we have our UVs in here, and I'm just going to scale them down just a little bit and then scale them out like this on the X so that they are just using efficient space here. I'm going to keep a little bit of a gap around the edges, but something like that looks all right. Now we have our flat UVs being displayed in the viewport, and we have our UVs over the paint black texture that we have here. So why isn't it showing black in our viewport? Well, that's because we have to tell our object that it needs to use the paint texture. So let's open up a shader editor over here. I'm going to press N to close that. And you can see that it's still using our F-SPY camera image. So let's save this material. I'm going to rename this to Matte Proj for project. I'm going to save a fake user and then duplicate this. Call this one Matte Paint. And then all we have to do is change this here to paint. And now you can see it's using our paint texture, which is all black, with our flat UV map. Okay, so let's paint onto this. Let's go to the texture paint workspace. And then let's go to material preview mode here as well. And we can scroll out here. I am also going to open up another shader editor here because we'll need to be able to access these nodes here too. Okay, so now what I can do is I can come and just start painting either in the 3D viewport or the 2D viewport, and you can see what's happening there. Now, if for some reason your painting doesn't match what you see over here, just make sure that your UV map active render is correct. So we want to make sure that it's not mod or original. So if I start painting on now, you can see it's like it's not even lining up with my mouse cursor. So just make sure that the active render is set to flat because that's what we're painting on. Now there is an easy way to override the active render here so we can make sure it's always using the correct one, and that's over here in our shaders. So with the paint texture node, we can pull out this vector and then type UV, enter, and now we can choose the correct UV, which is the flat one, and now this overrides the active render, forcing everything here to always be using the flat, and then if I change it here, it doesn't matter. So that's actually pretty helpful for us. Okay, I'm just going to reload that image. Now, how do we paint from our FSPY image here using the project modifier and take this and then paste it onto our paint image using the flat UVs? The answer is with the clone tool. So if we click clone over here and then we come to our tool tab, we can change the mode from material to single image. Now, again, this may be different in Blender 4 and above, but Blender 3.6, this is how you do it. So up here is the destination. So we're going to choose our paint because that's the image texture we are painting onto. And then we're using the flat here to paint onto it. So destination here. And then under our brush settings, we will click clone from paint slot. Open that up. This is our source right here. So our source image, of course, is going to be our o1.fspy. And then our source UV map is going to be our mod, which is our modifier. So it's going to take it from here and paste it onto here. And so that is it. And we should be able to start painting now by just clicking in painting. And look at that. It's just automatically painting what we have from our projection modifier, onto our flat image over here. You can see that's filling in as we go along. We just have to rotate all around our object, make sure we're painting in every nook and cranny here. So this method is a little bit tedious, but once we're finished, you can see that we've painted on a new texture that is now flat. And we can see this over here. By the way, if we go to view, we can toggle the display texture UVs on or off. So just going to click those off for now. Control space to make this full screen. And here we go. This is our flattened texture. But this is still only exists in Blender, so let's save it out as an image. I'm going to make a new folder called MatExpKit. And then we'll just save this as paint, and I will save this as a JPEG at 100%. There we go. We've saved it out onto our computer. And now, since it's already plugged in, so we can switch back and forth between the projection. And of course, this is not using our projection UV map here. It's using the flat. So we can do the same thing. Just pull out the UV over here and make sure that this is always using our mod, which is our projection modifier. And so now the difference is here, if we come over to our UV editing and then we select our camera, move that, you can see that it's not sticking. Or if we move this, it's not sticking. But if we change this to use our painted image, which we will make a fake user here as well, now we can move it no problem because everything sticks like it should because it's using this flat image instead of a projection from the camera. But that is not the best part. The best part is we can now come over here and you can see we don't have any warping of our texture. It's all clean and straight. And I can actually just get rid of both of these, and it doesn't matter which order I get rid of them because I'm not applying them because I don't need them anymore. I just used them in the order of operations that they have. So the subdivision first and then the UV project second. I used that and then I painted it on using those settings. And after creating that painted image, then we don't need these anymore. We can get rid of them. And not only do we have straight textures, but we also have clean geometry. We don't have any subdivisions. We only have the 6 original sides of this rectangle box that we created. So it's really low poly, really efficient. And those two things together are a really powerful way to create low poly assets that look really good. Now, of course, we need to fix the back and the bottom and side over here, but we'll do that last. Before we do that, I'm going to show you an even easier way to do what we just did, but instead of having to rotate around our object and manually paint everything in, we're going to have Blender just bake it all at once for us. And that is with baking. So let's go to the texture paint workspace. I'm going to duplicate this and title this baking because we want to be in object mode for this. And then I'm going to take our shader area and pull it across so that we have more easy access to this because we're going to be working with several different nodes down here. We can scroll out to see everything here. And of course, don't forget to save your work as you go along. So we're essentially going to do the same exact thing. So let's go back to our projection. I'm going to duplicate this again. We're going to call this bake 1 because we're going to do 2 bakes. I'm going to duplicate this out over here. Scroll in and X to get rid of that. We're going to create a new one. We're going to call this bake 1 also. Bake 1. 1024 by 1024 is fine. All the same settings that we had before. Say OK. And I like to put it here under the material output because everything that's coming in here lined up to the surface of the material output is what you see in the viewport here. We're going to take everything you see here and we can add things and make a whole bunch of combination to plug in here, and then we can bake everything all at once onto one texture, which is really cool. In this case, it's pretty simple. It's only this, but I like to have the bake next to the material output just as a visual, knowing that it's going to be kind of the final result. You can really place this anywhere as long as you have it selected. Now let's also select our bake 1 here. So everything is currently black. And if we pull this over here and we plug this in, you can see it's all black. So we want to keep this one plugged in though for now. And so let's go to our bake settings, but we can't find those in Eevee. They are in cycles. So we've got to switch to cycles. I'm going to switch to GPU compute. If you have it, you should do that. And then I'm going to bring the samples way down. We don't actually even need samples because we don't have any light bounces. This is just an emission shader. But I'm still going to just put these down to 0.1 and 32 and then denoise, even though we really don't need those. But now we have an option down here called bake. We want to open that up, and then the bake type, we need to change that to emit because again, this is an emission shader. Okay, now we are almost ready. We just need to make sure everything is selected like it needs to be. Let's also enable the texture paint UVs here so that we can see those. And if for some reason it doesn't listen to you, just click back and forth between a different editor and then back. And then we're on the paint again, so we can either select it here, or if we select something different and then select this again, there we go, it's refreshed. I don't know why it does that, just sometimes Blender is a little glitchy. But you can see it's low poly because I noticed that we actually forgot to add in our modifiers again, because we don't want to paint it looking all warped like this. So let's bring these back, of course, like we've done before. You know the drill. Aspect ratio for our image, 1920 by 1080, and our F-spy. There we go. So we want to make sure everything is straight. I'm going to see if I can refresh this here. Yeah, there we go. So this is what it should look like with our extra geometry from our subdivision. Now we need to make sure that everything is selected like it needs to be. Now we're still in texture paint, and I don't know why. So just be in object mode, and maybe that's why we were seeing weird stuff over here. Okay, well, I guess it looks different between our texture paint mode and object mode. It really doesn't matter which one you're in, so you can decide to be in whichever one here. I think what I'm going to do is change this to the UV editor because we're going to be messing with the UVs anyway. So let's just do that. I'm just going to deselect everything, and then I'm going to click the UV sync selection just so that we see those even though we don't have anything selected. Okay, so our object needs to be selected. Now we have both of these objects selected, so let's just select our object here and go back into edit mode so we can see our UVs as well. Okay, so I think we're almost ready here. We've got our plane selected, which that's our box here. The bake texture needs to be selected. That's really important because this is what's being baked onto. And then we also need to make sure the UV map flat is selected. Now you might think, well, why don't we just override it by duplicating this over here and plugging it in here and changing it to flat. Well, you're on the right track, but the UV map here doesn't override the UV map selection. It only overrides the active render. And there's no way to have a selection of UVs over here, so we have to actually select it from this menu here. So make sure that your UV map is selected, or at least it's displayed over here. If you don't see this, you'll know it's selected because you can see it over here. So if you see any of these other UV maps like this, it just means you don't have the right one selected. So just go ahead and select the correct one. So we've got our object selected, we've got our bake selected, not our UV map. Our bake needs to be selected. And then we have to have our flat UV map displayed, which means that it's also selected. And with those three things selected, let's save it. And now we can come to our render properties again and click bake. And you'll see the texture bake progress bar down here. And then ta-da! So we've created the exact same thing as our paint, except for we didn't have to rotate around our object painting every nook and cranny. It just did the work for us, which I like, and which programs are supposed to do anyway. Now we do have a little different here. We have some edge bleeding, or margin is what it's called, and that's this down here. So we can change that. So if you can see, our paint didn't have any because we used the viewport to paint on. So this is up to you. It's your personal preference. You can get rid of those, or maybe I'll just put it down to like a size of 4 pixels. Sometimes it's good to have a little bit of edge bleed to hide any seams. So I'm just gonna bake that again with this new setting. And as long as you have clear image selected here, it will clear everything out. Oh, and Blender crashed, of course. Well, that'll happen sometimes. So just reopen Blender, and this is exactly why we save it before we bake. Although we did lose our bake because we didn't actually save this out onto our computer. So we just have to do it again, but we're all ready to do that because we did save it. So let's bring this down to 4 again, and then click bake. And there we go. You can see the bleeding is a lot less. It's just 4 pixels out. So I like that, and we're going to keep that. Let's save the image as, and this one I'm going to save as bake1, JPEG 100%. And so we can actually get rid of these. We can actually also get rid of the emission as well. We don't really need that. We can plug this right into the material output, and it's going to be the same thing. So we can just plug her in right there. And there we go. If we uncheck that, you can see our image is flat, just like our paint. Just doing the same thing with 2 different methods. Personally, I like the bake method myself. And if we come back to our layout, we can do the same exact thing because now everything is sticking on and we don't need our UV subdivision or projection. And we've got low poly result again with a clean, straight texture. Okay, so last thing, let's clean up the back and side and bottom here. We want to make it look like a legit game box here. So to do that, let's go back to our baking workspace. I'm going to duplicate this one. We're going to call this bake 2. Let's make sure each of these are, we have everything needs to have an F on it for fake user. That's this right here, that F at the beginning, just so we don't lose this information if we close Blender. So this will be bake 2. And what we want to do is adjust the UVs. Oh, this is a texture paint again. Oh, I think I know why. If we come to our tool, all the way down to the bottom, our workspace, it's texture paint mode. So I'm just going to click object mode instead so that we don't have to worry about constantly changing it here. And now if we go back and forth, so this should be texture paint and this should be object still. Good, okay. But what we need to do now is add in another UV map. I'm just going to duplicate our flat one here. I'm going to title this one Fix because we're going to fix our UVs so that they display the box more accurately. I also want to change the UV map flat here to Fix, which currently is, let's see, if we tab into edit mode and check the UV sync selection, you can see if I click back and forth between the flat and the fix, they're identical. unlike the original or mod. So the fix is the one we want to have selected because that's the one we want to manipulate over here. And the active render is being overridden by this UV map here, which is fixed, which is what we want. So now all we have to do is come over here, and as long as we have the sync selection on, we can take this face here, the back face, the one we need to change, and we can move it over here by pressing G, and then I'm going to press Y to constrain it up and down, and just move it up like that. And now you can see in here what's happening. Let's also disable those faces so that we can see that more clearly. Okay, so it's upside down, so all we have to do is press R over here and 180 to flip that around. And ta-da! Now we have a new back face that's identical to the front face. Now that's not really what it looks like in the real world, but this is how you can fix it with just one texture. So we're going to do that with the other faces here. So let's go to the side here and select that one, press G to grab, and then I'm going to constrain it on the X and pull that over here to match those. So you can see it looks something like that. I'm also going to disable the overlay so we can see that a little bit better. Now this, it doesn't look, I want to kind of match it with this one so the text is facing the same way. So I'm just going to take this face again and rotate it 180 degrees here, like that. I'm also going to move it a little bit differently here. Not too much there. Maybe over just slightly like that. Okay, yeah, it doesn't matter. You can be as perfectionistic with that as you want. And then last one, we're select the bottom and grab that and move that up to match the top, just like that. And look at that. We now have a fully straightened out texture over our entire object. But we have one more step, and that is we want to bake this again. And we're going to bake it from this texture onto a duplicated texture, a new one. So I'm going to duplicate this one out and click this button here to make this bake 2. I'm going to select it up here because we want to save this out as a bake 2. Right now it's currently using the same bake 1. So let's go ahead and save bake 2 as, press plus to make that bake 2, enter. And so remember, we have to have 3 things selected. We have to have our object selected, which we do, which is the plane. And then we have to have our bake selected, our bake texture. It doesn't have to be called bake, but whatever we want to bake onto. And then we have to have the correct UV map selected. Now, right now, we don't have the correct UV map selected. We want to use the fix UV map like this to be plugged in to our image and our material output. So this is good. But we want to use the flat to bake on to our texture. So remember how we do that, we have to actually physically click it over here so that it's displayed like this. So now we're ready, save it, and then come to our render, down to bake, make sure that's emit, and we click bake. Oh, okay, and Blender just really is not liking me right now. So let's do that again. That is why it's always good to make sure we are saving often. I'm gonna to select everything, so all of our faces. Maybe that will help. I'm also going to tab into object mode. Let's just see if that helps. Go to render. I'm going to save it one more time. Object selected, bake selected, flat selected, and bake. All right, and ta-da, look at that. So now everything has now been painted on from the UV map of our fixed that is displayed correctly like this, and it's pasted it on the UV map this way on our bake 2. And now we can actually just delete this one and choose bake 2 here. And then we want flat for this display here. And we are done. Well, actually, we're not done yet. We still have to save our image. So since we've already saved this as bake 2, we can just press Alt S to save over that. And there we go. So if we deselect everything here, that is looking pretty good. And so with everything set up, we are done now. I can go out into object mode. I can move this over and you can see our straight texture And we didn't have to add any of our modifiers again because we were baking from our initial bake, which means we still have all clean geometry. We only have 6 faces, and this is a very efficient, low poly, high texture fidelity game asset that you can use. Or you can put it in the background of a VFX shot, or like we're going to be doing in this course, is using this type of thing for reflections off of our skull. So to quick demonstrate that, we're going to be using our trusty monkey head here. Make this smooth. Let's give it a material. We don't need this anymore here. Bring that down. Give us a new material. I'll just say metal, principled BSDF, and metallic all the way up. The roughness all the way down. And we're still in the Eevee renderer with our material preview. So we can go into our rendered mode. And you can see the reflection starting to happen. Let's move the well, let's hide the camera here and then move this around. Oh, and I don't think I'm using my GPU. Oh, I am using my GPU compute. Why is that going so slowly? I don't know. Maybe I think my computer's just getting a little tired because it's recording and it's been a long time and a lot of things have been open. I probably need to restart it. Anyway, there you go. As you can see the reflections now of this here on our monkey head. And maybe we can bring the roughness up a little bit here. Yeah, I don't know, something like that. And so this is what we're going to be doing. This is why we're going to be building out our room using this method so that we can have accurate reflections on our metal skull from the surrounding environment. Just like we did with our simple box, but we're going to be using the projection mapping method in order to build out our world a little bit more accurately with mostly accurate spacing of objects in our scene, which will more accurately reflect that light bouncing off the skull. But of course, if you're trying to capture your entire surroundings like a 360-degree image, yet if you're not using a 360-degree camera, you're going to need to take multiple pictures in order to recreate your surroundings. So therefore, in the next few videos, we're going to talk about how to use F-Spy along with multiple pictures from multiple different angles and combine them together in Blender to be able to build out our environment. So when you're ready, head on over to the next one.